glad to be here today. Thanks for the invitation. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you today about finding and identifying wild mushrooms. This is something I've been passionate about for quite a long time. In fact, my educational background started out, I thought I was going to be a bird biologist, and I kind of went that direction for a while, but for a variety of reasons, I ended up getting training as an undergraduate and then in my PhD in the biology of fungi and trees. And to do that kind of science, you don't necessarily have to know how to identify mushrooms, but for the kind of stuff I wanted to do, I really wanted to understand fungal communities, the different species and what they do and how they're functioning in the environment. And in order to do that, I had to learn how to identify mushrooms. And I didn't actually take a mycology class at the time. What I did was I got out a book and I asked questions as much as I could to people who knew more than I did, and that's how I learned in the first place. And so my knowledge of this stuff is all just self-taught and hanging around people who know more than I do and asking questions. And so that's kind of how the perspective this is going to be coming from, and that you can do the same thing. I did want to mention before I forget, there's another event coming up later this week. And it's not a coincidence, by the way. This is the best time of year for finding wild mushrooms in Mississippi. After all, especially after all the rain we've had in the last week or two, the month of June is the best time of year. It's the most reliable. That's why these events are scheduled now. And so I'm leading an outdoor event, a foray, Thursday afternoon. This is at 5:30 p.m. on Thursday evening, and I hope that you'll learn what you can today and then show up for this over in Oxford. So that's in Oxford at the, come on in. That's in Oxford. If you are driving west on Highway 6 or 278 and trying to kind of going through Oxford, Chucky Mullins Drive is, cuts through campus. Get off on that going south, and right there is the entrance to, on the right, if you go through a stop sign and then on the right, that'll be the entrance to the South Campus Rail Trail, South Campus Recreation Trail, South Campus Rail Trails, used to call it the Whirlpool Trails. We're meeting up right there at the entrance to that. And that'll be a little bit of this same information, but more just focused on let's go out and look for mushrooms and then have them in our hand and talk about how to identify them and how to collect them. So I hope you can join for that. That's on Thursday at 5:30 in Oxford. And that event is sponsored by the public library there in Oxford. So the first lesson is that although the mushrooms themselves are really obvious, I was looking at some photos earlier that, they're starting to pop up, you can see them. What I really want you to start thinking about with the biology of mushrooms is to think about the part that is underground or buried in whatever the fungus is living in, like a log or the soil or a dead tree. And that is called the mycelium. This is the body of the fungus, actually. And it's a web, a network, a web of fungal tissue, fungal cells that look like that. And the mushroom is really, you can think of it as like the fruit. So when you have an apple tree, the fruit is the apples. Well, with fungi, the mushrooms are the fruit. And if you look at this, what do you see there? What are those mushrooms growing on?
It's like a log.
It's a log, right? And so in that log is a whole bunch of mycelium. It's the body of the fungus. It's living in that log, growing throughout it. And what's it doing in there? Why would it be living inside the log? Why would it?
Nutrient.
Yeah, it's getting everything it needs, in fact. Nutrients and even carbon to build its body. Plants don't have to do that. Plants can breathe in carbon dioxide and make their cells out of thin air. But fungi, like animals like us, they have to eat that stuff to get it to build their body. So it's eating the log and getting its nutrients and its carbon from the log. And then meanwhile, there is a microscopic part of the fungus that you can't see with the naked eye, and that's the spores. Spores are like, sort of like seeds, but they're even smaller. They're like microscopic seeds, and you can see their evidence of them a little bit here. Where on these photos is the evidence of the spores? Can you see that?
It's in the gills.
Yes. A lot of mushrooms have gills underneath the cap, and that's where the spores are made, is on the sides of the gills. But what has happened here that can allow you to see the color of the spores? Can you see that? Yeah, here, right here on this leaf, there's a white deposit. That's a spore print. It's where the mushroom has dropped a whole bunch of its white spores onto the leaf. And that allows you to tell if that mushroom has white spores, and that now you've got your first clue to its identity if it's an unknown mushroom. This one here, what color are the spores? You see those, that right there?
Yeah.
That blackish, grayish deposit is the spores from this mushroom, which had dropped onto the cap of its neighbor. And so that's another spore print showing you that that one has black spores. And then here's a spore print I made on purpose. Actually, my friend Pat made this spore print on a piece of paper from a spore that a mushroom that she found in her front yard. This is a spore print. That's a thing you can and should do if you're interested in mushrooms, is make spore prints. They can be really beautiful and cool. This is a beautiful one. It's one of the only mushrooms I know of that has green spores. This is from the green spore parasol mushroom, which I'll show you some photos of. You're probably seeing this mushroom lately in your yard or in your neighbor's yard or in a field. It's one of the ones that comes up and has a nice white cap. And it looks like a store-bought mushroom. It should be nice and edible, but it's actually poisonous. It's not going to kill you, but it's one that causes a lot of poisonings because it's in your yard and people think it looks yummy.
We eat a lot of portobellos, but
Mhm.
I've never seen any spores on them. Do they?
They do. They have gills underneath the cap, and they make a dark, like a brownish spore print if you
Maybe
give them a
ours are
chance.
just too young to have it.
Sometimes they're too young, but you know, if you buy little what are they called? Cremini mushrooms. Those are like baby portobellos, and then when they get bigger, there's a stage where they'll be happy to drop spores. And sometimes when you buy those little packages that have like a styrofoam, and then there's plastic over top, if you take the mushroom off and look on the styrofoam there'll be a brown spore print there.
But it wouldn't hurt you to eat a spore.
No, it doesn't hurt you. No. So we already talked about this a little bit. What are the fungi eating? Well, they're eating organic carbon and a bunch of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium and everything that they need to make their DNA and their proteins and all the parts of their body. And in fact, many fungi that you'll find in the world, this is how they make a living. This is how they get what they need, is by eating dead stuff like dead wood, dead leaves, dead animals, other dead fungi. They eat dead stuff. And those are called decomposers. And that's one of the 3 ways that a fungus gets what it needs, is to be a decomposer. However, another strategy for a fungus to get its nutrients and its carbon is to be a parasite or a pathogen and eat living things. And here's a couple of examples. We're coming up on peach season now, and peach farmers are battling against some fungi that do want to eat a living peach, like right there. And then this is a fungus that likes to eat corn. And this is called corn smut, and it grows on the ears of the corn and infects the little kernels, and each kernel kind of blows up into a big ball of fungus. And that actually is a food that you can eat. You can eat those. Wheat lacoche, I think in Spanish, and you can buy it in cans at certain grocery stores, and it actually tastes like corn, believe it or not. And it's popular in certain parts of the world. So that's number 2, strategy number 2 about how fungi get their food. The third one is to be a mutualist and have a partner. And here are the 2 main ways that fungi do that. On the left is what I study from my own research, and that is to be a mycorrhizal fungus. That means when the fungus is living in the soil and attaching to the roots of a plant. it's still getting its own nutrients out of the soil. It's getting nitrogen and phosphorus and everything out of the soil. But what's it getting from the plant now? Remember the special power that I mentioned that plants have earlier?
Carbon.
Yes, photosynthesis, right? And you've probably learned about that in a class at some point. Photosynthesis, plants can do that. That's a superpower that plants have, and some algae and some bacteria. They can take carbon out of the air, and then what they do is they trade it to the fungus in return for some of those soil nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen. So it's a partnership there. So instead of having to battle for the little bit of carbon in a dead log, these fungi are subsidized by a plant who gives them a bunch of free carbon. Sugars, basically. Simple sugars. And lichens do the same thing. The fungus that makes up lichens, these crusty things that grow on bark and rocks and your mailbox and everywhere, well, they have a photosynthetic partner as well. Not a big plant like in this tree, but in fact a microscopic algae that live inside them. Little tiny algae. So they're kind of providing a home for the algae and giving some nutrients to them in return for the carbon. But those algae are doing the same thing as the plant, photosynthesizing.
Does that little tiny algae live anywhere else that the lichens aren't?
They don't, they only live in that fungus, yeah. Yep, and if you take a little piece of that and crush it and look at it under a microscope, you see a whole bunch of little green dots spill out into the water. They're little baby, little algae, little single-celled algae. Yep. You can't see them with the naked eye, but if you look under a microscope, you can see them there. And I wanted to show you, if you look at a close-up of the roots of a tree like that, that's mycorrhizal, you can see the mycorrhizae on the tips of the roots, these little white structures. So if you pull a baby pine tree out of the soil in the woods and look at the roots, you can see little clusters of white and black and brown and other colors. Those are these fungi living on the tips of the roots of the plant. Those are the mycorrhizal fungi, and they make a structure called the mycorrhiza, which is myco is the fungus part, and the rhiza is the root of the plant. It's a symbiotic structure. And so the reason I'm telling you about all of this is that this kind of knowledge of the ecology of fungi can help you find mushrooms in the world. It can help you understand where to look. And this little guy, he's now a college student at Stanford. I don't know.
That's Elliot.
Yeah. Some of you may recognize him as the son of Meredith Wolf, who lives in Oxford. And so I want you to think about that fungal ecology as some clues to where to look for mushrooms. And especially also think about the habitat. I'm incorporating some art here, which is some paintings from a good friend of mine who's a French painter, and she has painted different kinds of mushrooms in their different habitats. So here we have chanterelles, and what do you see is the habitat of the chanterelle?
Forest.
Yeah, it's forested, and you can see the acorns, and you can see the oak leaves. In fact, chanterelles love to grow by oak trees. Here, what do you see? Yeah, morels, and where are they growing?
Water.
Yeah, there's water, there's a creek. Here there's mountains in the background, not as relevant in Mississippi. You can think of these as the hills in the north of Mississippi. But yeah, there's water there, and then certain trees like elm trees and are clues. And then here we have, anyone recognize this one? Yeah, it's a puffball, and puffballs grow in open fields near pathways and grass, and those are good edible mushrooms. So different species of mushrooms, different kinds of mushrooms have different key habitats. So if you want to look for a certain kind of mushroom, you got to think about the habitat that it lives in and target that habitat.
Could I ask a question about the puffballs?
Sure.
Are they the ones that turn into brown smoke?
Yes,
And they're edible?
they are, but you got to catch them well before that stage. So if you slice one open and it's starting to turn spory and puffy, then it's too late. But if you find them early when they've just emerged, then they're like a white marshmallow on the inside, just nice firm white flesh. That's the stage where they're edible. Yeah.
Is there a look-alike that you have to be aware of?
Not really. I'll show you later that there are some things that on the outside could kind of look like that, but once you slice them open, there's really no doubt. We will get to that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about strategies for collecting mushrooms and fungi. The first thing is to observe as much as you can while you're out there in the field. Take photos. These days, photos are usually have GPS points already embedded in them if you've got a decent modern phone, so that's nice. And then observe, when you collect a mushroom, observe the habitat around you. Make note mentally or in a notebook, was it in the soil? Was it just soil, or was it growing out of some buried log or other dead wood, like a stump or something that got covered up? Was it growing, or was it on the trunk of a living tree or some other plant? Was it on like a magnolia cone that had fallen off of a tree, etc.? Where was it growing? Also, if it's dead wood, can you tell? Was it a hardwood or a conifer? A lot of times, different mushrooms grow on either hardwoods or on pine or other conifers. So if you can figure that out, if you can figure out what kind of wood it's growing on, that can help with identification. Also note the trees that are growing around when you find a mushroom. Not just the tree that's right above it, because roots are long and they can grow from one tree under another, so it can be a little deceptive if you're only looking at the tree that's right above you. Make note also of other trees that are in the area. And even if it's out in the grass, it could be that the tree over here 30 feet away has roots that grow out into your lawn, and it could still be attached to the roots of that tree. Mycorrhizal mushrooms, like we talked about before, can only grow when they're attached to their host plant. So if that plant isn't around, then those mushrooms aren't going to grow. So you showed me that red mushroom with the red cap and that bolete. Both of those are mycorrhizal with trees, and only will grow if their trees are nearby. So you won't find them, a quarter mile out in the middle of a pasture with no trees around. They'll only grow if the appropriate tree is nearby. Same thing with chanterelles. They're mycorrhizal. They're not going to grow without oak trees or hickories or some other hardwood nearby. Then when you go to collect your mushroom, collect the whole thing. Don't just snap it off, especially if it's an unknown mushroom and you're going to try to figure out what it is. Don't just snap it off halfway up the stem. Bring the whole thing, dig underneath it and get the whole stem, because sometimes the stem going into the soil can be pretty long and it can have important clues associated with it that can help you identify it later. It can have like a little sac around the base or scales or something, so you want to get the whole thing. Pop it out of the ground and take the whole thing. Also try to get multiple ages, and by the way, it can be very deceptive, but it sometimes looks like there's 2 or 3 different species of mushrooms growing in an area right together, but often that's the babies and then the teenagers and then the adults, and they can change a good bit as they mature. So collect all of them together. Get the little itty bitty ones that are just starting to pop up, and get the fully grown ones, and get the intermediate ones. And sometimes the book will ask you, what does it look like when it's young? What does it look like when it's old? And if you only have a young one or you only have an old one, then you won't be able to answer that question. As a material, I recommend wax paper. It's kind of a good happy medium. If you wrap stuff in cellophane or plastic bags, mushrooms can handle that for a little while, but they get sweaty and start to rot pretty quickly if you trap them in a plastic bag. So I recommend avoiding plastic bags for collecting mushrooms. Paper bags are fine, especially for temporary transport. It's definitely preferable to plastic, but the best intermediate is wax paper. So either pieces of wax paper that you kind of wrap and twist around the mushrooms, or you can buy these they're like little lunch baggies that are made of wax paper. Those are perfect for storing mushrooms. But if all you've got is a basket or a shopping bag or a Walmart bag or whatever, you can chuck mushrooms in there and take them home and it'll be fine. Just recognize that sometimes the mushrooms will, if you have a mushroom that's tough to identify, you're going to want it to be in as good a shape as possible when you get it home. So if you care about that, then try to put it in wax paper and take good care of it on the way home. Observe as many characteristics of the mushroom as you can while it's fresh, because it changes. It's gonna look a little different when you get it home and put it on the kitchen table compared to when you picked it. And so get good photos, and I'll talk about in a minute what does a good photo look like. Get good photos when it's fresh, and watch for things to change as it gets a little older, even within a half hour or an hour. And then some tools, I've mentioned a few already, but I really do recommend a basket, because the basket won't collapse on itself when you're filling it with chanterelles, which is, you know, one goal for quite a few of us is to find lots of good edible mushrooms. So if you want them to not completely crush themselves, then have a basket that has some rigidity to it. But again, you can just chuck them in a bag and that'll be fine too. Canvas is a good material. Wax paper is good. Brown bags are fine too. Pencil and paper and a notebook is optional, but sure is handy if you need to make notes about the mushroom. A sturdy knife is kind of important. Some kind of a pocket knife or a hunting knife, or just something to use to cut, like if you have to cut the mushroom off of a log. If you're picking edible mushrooms, it's really a good idea to, and you know what it is, like a chanterelle, it's a good idea to trim off the dirty parts before you put it in your bag. If you put in dirty mushrooms all in a bag together, they're gonna get each other even dirtier. And then that just creates more washing in your kitchen later. So trim off the dirt, especially with chanterelles, the little stump, the little base of the stump where it was growing in the soil, just trim that off before you throw it in your bag, and that'll save you a lot of work later. So a knife is really handy. A phone these days, almost everyone is carrying one. The cameras on those phones are really great now, especially for close-ups of mushrooms. A compass and a whistle is a good idea if you're in a weird place, you're worried about getting lost, it's a place where you can potentially get lost. I've done field trips over the years, you know, since about 2007 in Oxford, and I did have one student once use their whistle because they got lost at the Whirlpool Trails and had to help us come find her. So it has come in handy at times. A little hand lens or magnifying glass can be useful. It's totally optional, but can be pretty fun to have. Protect yourself from the elements. You know, if it might rain, you might want to bring a rain poncho or a jacket or something. I do also recommend bug spray. There's all kinds of different bug spray. This clothing that's treated with permethrin does work really well to keep ticks and chiggers off of you. Tick and chigger season in Mississippi happens to coincide pretty well with chanterelle season, so it's a hazard of the game. Also, you can spray your ankles and your feet and your pant legs with bug spray. There's all kinds of good options, but permethrin is a good one. And then books. I really recommend buying at least one good mushroom book to have and consult closely and read, and I'll show you some options here. These, I would say, are the three most essential books. Mushrooms of the Gulf Coast States is a pretty big, heavy, thick one. It's a really good book, and it's really geared towards this area, and it's quite recent, and so it's really highly recommended. Same thing with Mushrooms of the Southeast. This is a nice one, that one in the middle, because it's small and kind of not quite pocket size, I guess if you have big pockets, but you can easily chuck it in your mushroom basket and bring it with you. And that's a really good book as well. The two of them are pretty complementary. They don't cover exactly the same species. There's a lot of overlap, but then there's species that are in the one but not the other, and vice versa. And then Mushrooms Demystified by David Aurora, that's an old classic from the 1980s that is still, do you have one? Okay, it's a great book, and I recommend it for all kinds of reasons. All three of these books have introductory sections that are 10, 20, 30, 50 pages long, all about mushroom hunting. And I really recommend you read those sections, those introductory sections. They have great advice about mushroom hunting, techniques and approaches and how to do it. Read those sections and try to follow their advice. And that section is particularly good in Mushrooms Demystified. That book, though, also is just chock full of really entertaining text that describes different mushroom species. The author is quite humorous. The photos are funny. It's just a great, great book, like really well put together and just super fun to read through. And all three of them, you can really get a lot of value just by paging through the photos and looking at the names. Look at the photo, look at the names. Like, any of you teachers or have been teachers in the past? So, how did you learn the names of your students? Repetition, yeah. Same thing here.
Name tags.
Name tags, yeah. And so you've got the face and you've got the name, right? And you look at it, you look back and forth. It's the same thing with mushrooms, where if you've got photo sections of a book, just page through and look at the photo and look at the name. And just try to prepare like it's a class you're about to teach, and you gotta recognize the faces. That really helps shortcut a lot of the ID stuff that I'm gonna tell you about if you just recognize. Like when you see a student whose name you know, you don't then think, okay, they've got blue eyes, brown hair, they're fairly short, it's a male, they tend to wear jeans, okay, it's Jacob. You don't go through that process, right? You don't key out the student with your key, you just recognize the student. And that's often how, like, that's the best way to recognize mushrooms, is just recognize them rather than having to like use a key in a book. And the best way to get to that point is to study a bunch of photos with names until you start to recognize some of them. I also wanted to mention a website, which is this one down here, mushroomexpert.com. It's probably the best online source for mushroom identification. All kinds of great keys and other information and photos. And pages 1 through 50 in Mushrooms Demystified are really valuable. These three books are examples of additional mushroom books. Like if you really get into this and you decide you're just going to nerd out on mushroom identification, these are some of the kinds of books you can start to accumulate and get, ask for Christmas and that kind of thing. So there's multiple different books on the boletes of North America, milk mushrooms. These are specialty books for different kinds of mushrooms, different groups that really deserve their own book because that's how diverse they are and how tough they can be to identify to species. There's websites also for some of this stuff. So there's a website just for the Amanitas, another one for boletes, and so on. I've just shown you some examples there. Also, there is some good online communities for mushroom identification. There's a good Facebook page in Mississippi, the Mushrooms of Mississippi Facebook page. I'm a moderator on there, although I'm not that active on it, but it's a really good community. You can post photos and say, I found these mushrooms, can anyone help me identify them? I would encourage you to do your own homework first before you post on there. Try your best. See if you can figure it out, and then post a question, and people can help. And if you do post, try to give some idea of the habitat, the county you're in, the location, etc., what trees were around, all that kind of info that you have. Also try to provide informative photos, and we're going to talk about this. I'm going to show you some examples. Close-up photos, clear photos. If there's a mushroom down here and you want somebody to help you with identifying it, don't just stand up here and use your phone and snap a photo of it from the top 5 feet away. That's not the best photo that you can do. What we want is clear close-up photos, not just of the top, but also the underside, and then maybe even slice through it and get a profile view of the interior of it, and that'll be so much more valuable. And do your own homework before you ask people for help. Do what you can until you've reached the limits of your abilities, and then ask someone for help to get you further. But also, don't take someone's answer on the internet as gospel. I know that the internet is always right, but in the case of mushrooms and everything else, right, you've got to take it with a grain of salt. Now, on this Facebook page, if you post a photo and 10 people all say the same thing, they're probably right. But just because one person says what they think it is, you can't just trust one person, right? So I'm going to show you some examples of informative mushroom photos. Okay, so what do we like about this photo? Why is this valuable?
Top, side, and bottom.
Yeah, the one photo, it shows both the top of the mushroom and the bottom underside of the cap. What else?
And the stem and where it's growing.
Yeah, it's showing the stem, it's showing where it's growing, good, it's showing the habitat, right? So if you took these same mushrooms and put them in the same position on a wooden picnic table, that's not as useful because, or if it was growing in the forest and then you brought it out to the grass and took this photo, that would be worse because it's deceptive. But these mushrooms were growing in the grass, and so now the photo shows the habitat.
Different ages?
Yeah, that's right. This one also shows a larger, more mature specimen and then a younger one. And you can see how the cap shape has changed a little bit as it got older and it developed that split. It has a little bit of more of a peak on the cap as a young one. So that's a good informative photo. Here's another example. This is an amanita, which has really valuable characteristics you can see when it's very young, especially. This baby here has scales left on the cap from when it was encased by a veil called a universal veil, which is distinctive to amanita. And baby amanitas really show that, and then they kind of break out of their egg as they mature. Some of them leave a sac over the base, and some of them leave scales as warts on the cap, and some of them have both. And you can sometimes find that on the adults, but it's easier to see on a young one. And you can see a little bit of the scales left on the cap here, but it's harder to see. So this one shows the baby, it shows the underside of the cap, it shows the top, it shows the side, it shows the habitat. So same idea there. And then here's a bolete. This is a group of mushrooms we're going to talk about specifically, but again, the idea here is to show the top, the bottom, and there's one thing here that it shows that I haven't mentioned yet. Anyone see that?
Yeah. Spores?
It's
Or
bruising. Yeah, so some mushrooms change color when they're bruised, and that is a identification character that you can use. This one happens to turn blue when you press your thumb into it, and that's what I had done there. And the speed of that and the color that it turns, those are both clues as to the ID. Again, the habitat is shown there too. All right. Any questions right now about any of that? Okay, we need to learn a little bit of vocabulary and anatomy of a mushroom. This is an example of a diagram. I think this is from Aurora. Yeah, from Mushrooms Demystified. A classic mushroom has a stalk or a stem. Those are two different synonyms for the same thing. There's a cap, which is this top part. And that's kind of where it ends in terms of universals that everybody has in a classic mushroom. Some mushrooms don't even have that, but a basic typical mushroom has a cap and a stalk. And then some things that might be present include gills underneath. Those look like little kind of razor blades. They're very thin and flabby, and that's where the spores are made, but not all mushrooms have that. Some mushrooms have distinct shapes with an umbo or a point there like that. Some are smooth. Annulus or ring. So some mushrooms have a ring around the stalk. I showed one of those here. Can you see the ring on the stalk of this one? That is left over from what's called a partial veil. It was covering the gills when the mushroom was young, and then that falls away and becomes a ring on the stalk when the mushroom breaks out of it. And then the sac around the base is called the vulva, and that is a remnant of that universal veil that was covering the baby amanita. Certain mushrooms have that, and most don't. And then look at the mycelium. Remember that word? That's the body of the fungus. Sometimes that's really obvious sticking out the bottom of the mushroom, and the color of that and how obvious it is can be something valuable to note. And now I want to mention, I said some mushrooms have gills, but there are other options. So here is a mushroom with gills. You can see how thin they are. and kind of blade-like. Well, an alternative to that is to have what's called false gills, and that's what some chanterelles have. So here's a chanterelle that has false gills. What do you see as the difference between the real gills and the false gills? Besides the fact that they're spaced closer together, that's sometimes real gills are spaced closer together as well. What else though? Yeah, so you're noticing good things. So these are forking and they kind of go down the stem. Real gills can do that as well, it turns out. The main difference I want to point out is that these are kind of blunt and shallow. If you poke in there, you're not going to be able to break them or peel them apart. They're not thin and flabby and like a razor blade. They're more just like hard veins growing on the stem or growing on the cap, on the underside of the cap. And then there are alternatives. So instead, some mushrooms have little teeth, like little icicles sticking down out of the cap. Some mushrooms have pores, like this bolete here. And so instead of gills or false gills or teeth, they have little holes. So there's a sponge layer and there's a bunch of little tubes going up into there, and those are called pores. And then other mushrooms have nothing at all. It's just completely smooth on the underside of the cap. This is another species of chanterelle. These are the two options that you'll see on our chanterelles around here, the smooth chanterelle and then the one that has the false gills. And then we're not going to go through all this vocabulary, but it really behooves you to learn the names for specific variations on all this stuff. And you can study this diagram in your Aurora, in your Mushrooms Demystified, or your other book that you buy. So the shape of the cap has all these different options. You can have conical, bell-shaped, umbonate, convex, concave, umbilicate with a little hole there, like a belly button, etc. The gills and how they attach to the stalk. Do they run down the stalk? That means they're decurrent. Or do they kind of go up when they go to the stalk like this? Adnext or even free with a gap, where there's a distinct gap between the gills and the stalk right there, or somewhere in between. Look at the shape of the stalk of the mushroom. Does it go into a bulb at the base? Does it go to a point? Does it just go straight down, etc.? And then notice, does it have an oblong, sort of off-center stalk, or no stalk at all, where the mushroom's just growing right off the side of a log or a tree, etc., like an absent stalk or a lateral stalk, off-center stalk. All of those variations are things to make note of, and then when you look through the book, try to figure out what you've got, and those are all clues you can use to identify the mushroom. And you do need to learn how to use a key. Yes, we want you recognizing certain mushrooms just by sight, but when you're going to often find mushrooms you don't recognize, and then you need to use a key. All these books have keys to all the different mushrooms, and you can learn to use those keys. We're going to do a quick exercise to practice this, okay? So here we have an unknown organism, and we have a key that might give us the identity of it. So the way you use a dichotomous key is written with two choices, and you choose one of those two options, and that leads you down one part of the key or the other. And you keep making a choice between two possibilities, and then you end up at the end with a good answer. And if you made the correct choice all along the way, and if your organism is in that key, then you've got the correct answer. So let's practice. Is the object yellow or not?
No.
Not, okay, so then you see, that was choice number one, and now we go to either 2 or 4, so we're going to go to 4. Okay, is the object purple and spiny or not?
No.
Not, okay, so then we go to 5. Does the object move of its own accord when poked with 4 stumps or projections on its underside, or not? Yes, it does, so it's a rabbit. Right? That worked out pretty well. Let's try again. with our next example. Okay, so there's another example. Can you see where this is headed? Okay, it's not yellow. So we go to 4. It's not purple and spiny. So we go to 5. And then, is it moving of its own accord when poked with 4 stumps on the underside? Yes, it is. So it's a rabbit, right? Okay, so what's the problem here?
It's not specific
Not in
enough.
Yeah, it's not in the key, right? The key is missing the javelina. And this happens with keys. Sometimes your key that you have is just not complete for all the organisms that you might encounter. So that's a caveat you have to keep in mind always with key in real books with real keys. Your species might be missing from the key. And with fungi that is possible because, I mean, my friend Pat that I mentioned earlier, she's discovered 3 or 4 new species of boletes just in northern Mississippi in the last 10 years, just by looking and doing her best to find, like, she pursued it to the ends of the earth and figured out that these fungi are not in any keys, and so, we sequenced the DNA and found that it's a new species. So, not all the species of mushrooms are in the keys. They're too diverse. The keys cannot be complete, and the knowledge is changing all the time. So, that is a key, that's a caveat. Okay, here's another example. How's this gonna work out, do you think? Okay, is it yellow?
Yes.
Kind of is, yeah, right, with black spots, but it's basically yellow, okay. So far so good, so go to 2. Is it more or less cylindrical?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. So we're gonna go to 3. Does it peel easily?
Well, it does
Not
feel,
careful.
How do you know? Okay, so let's say you were able to try peeling it and it did not peel easily. Okay, that means it's not a banana, but rather it's a banana slug. All right, well, banana slug is not correct. This is a rattlesnake. So again, if it's not in the key, then you might end up with the wrong answer. Okay, so with all of that background, I want to give you a practical process for identifying mushrooms. This is my process. And the first step is recognition. And this is where we want to try to get to with a lot of the mushrooms that are around us, is eventually recognize them as friends so that you don't have to go through a key, right? You just know that's a chanterelle or that's a russula or whatever. That's ideal. And eventually you'll get to this point where you can recognize that it's in this certain genus or a certain family, like, oh, that's a bolete. Now, I have no idea which bolete species it is, but I know it's in that family. And that's a pretty good place to get to, because then you can pull out the book and then try to figure out which bolete it is. And you don't have to start way from the beginning. You can start in the key that's more specific for that group. And then note and photograph characteristics using fresh specimens. And by the way, if you can't get to it right away, put it in the fridge. Don't leave it out on your countertop, because some of them will be fine on the countertop, but a lot of them will rot, and there will be maggots crawling out over your kitchen table, and you'll get in trouble with someone that you live with. Not that that's ever happened to me, but just saying, it's possible. Make a spore print, and if you've got a cap that you're using for a spore print, that's going to be out on your countertop on a piece of paper, and so it's not going to be refrigerated, so it might make maggots and it's going to dry out, and so try to keep some in the fridge for that same mushroom. So don't use up all your mushrooms making a spore print, because some of them should go in the fridge, and spore prints can take several hours or overnight, so just saying. Caps used for spore prints or specimens dried in the food dehydrator are no longer useful for looking at the fresh characteristics of the mushroom. Just keep that in mind. Make a spore print to get color. Spore color is an important characteristic. Some whole groups of mushrooms have white spores, some have yellow, some have black, some have brown, some have olive green, and the details of that can be important and useful for identification. Especially if it's a tricky group. the color of the spores can really help. If you only have one specimen, just use part of it to make a spore print and keep the other part fresh or in the fridge. If possible, if you're trying to make a spore print, use a mature mushroom. Baby mushrooms don't make spore prints. They're not mature enough to produce spores yet, so wait till you have a mature one and then make a spore print from that. But not too mature. If it's rotten, that's not going to make a good spore print either. Sometimes spore prints just don't work. A shortcut you can use though is if the mushroom is mature and it has gills, the color of the gills can tell you roughly the color of the spores. So if it's got whitish gills, it's probably got pale spores. If it's got black or brown gills, it's probably got blackish or brownish spores. If it's a mature mushroom. And also look for spores that are dropped onto the ground or onto other mushrooms or on the grass, like I showed you in those photos before. And then, if you've gotten to this point, use a key. Use a key that matches your level of recognition. So if you know what family it's in, use the key for that family. If you know what genus it's in, great. Use the key for that genus, etc. Or even, yeah. And if you have no idea what mushroom it is, there are places to start in these books. Okay, and here I've given you the page number to start on. So if you have Mushrooms Demystified by David Aurora, start on page 52. It's like, basically, what do I have? I have no idea, and he'll get you going. And there's a version of that in each of these other two books as well. If you have a mushroom that has gills, or a bolete or a polypore or something like that, then you can go further in the book and start there instead of way at the beginning of the book. If you know a little bit about what it is, you can start further down the road of identification in the book. If you know the family or the genus, then you can start with a more specific key yet. If you're still stuck after all of that, then you can try a separate book for one of these groups, or just page through a bunch of photos in different books. And that could be a fine place to start as well if you want. If you've got a mushroom, you really don't have any idea what it is, just sit there with your good mushroom book and just page through the photos until you start seeing stuff that kind of matches. And that might give you a clue as to where to start. And that can be just fine to do that. And if you're still stuck after doing all that, okay, now post on Facebook and ask for help.
Is there a mushroom app?
Yeah, there are some mushroom apps, and I haven't explored them lately. They might be better now than they used to be. They used to not be great. iNaturalist, the app, iNaturalist, can work okay for mushrooms. Some of them it does really well with, and it's worth a try. Yeah, and I should probably add that to this slide. Yeah, I do that occasionally too. But honestly, I don't use apps very much for mushrooms. So that's why I didn't put that on here, but I should. Okay, now we're going to talk about edible versus poisonous mushrooms. I know this is probably a topic on many of your minds. So a couple of general principles here. Indeed, many mushrooms are poisonous. Only some of them are deadly. Okay, a lot of poisonous mushrooms will just make you sick and for a few hours, and then you'll be fine as long as you stay hydrated. You might throw up, you might have diarrhea, but you're not going to die. And by the way, you can handle poisonous mushrooms. There's nothing wrong with holding a poisonous mushroom in your hand. It's not going to poison you through your skin. So it's different in that way compared to like poison ivy or some animals that you might hold in your hand. It's not going to poison you through your skin. You can hold it. You can even take a piece and put it in your mouth and taste it and then spit it out. Don't do that with poisonous mushrooms. But the books will even tell you, like, well, that's one characteristic it'll ask you. Is it bitter? Does it taste bitter? Well, to know that, you got to put it in your mouth and chew it up a little bit and then spit it out. And that's not going to kill you either. It's not going to make you sick. Okay, I'm saying don't worry. Just don't swallow it, okay? Don't swallow mushrooms. unless you're 100% sure that it's not poisonous. That's the rule. Don't worry about touching them, it's fine. You can touch them. Okay, and then this is the rule to follow to avoid poisoning yourself with mushrooms. The only safe way to eat wild mushrooms is to be 100% sure which species you have picked. And 100% sure whether that species is edible. There aren't any shortcuts to this. You can't look at a mushroom and say, well, it's bruised blue and so that means it's poisonous, or it's got a red cap and so that means it's poisonous. None of that stuff is true. There are no shortcut rules like that. You can't look at it and say, oh, it looks a lot like a portobello mushroom, so it must be edible. There's no such thing as it looks edible. Okay? Some mushrooms look terrible, but they're delicious, and some look like something that is completely benign and completely friendly, and it'll kill you. There's no rules like that. The only rule is you have to know what species it is and whether that species is edible. And people have been figuring out whether it's edible for generations now. You don't have to recreate that work to figure that out. Okay? Your intuition doesn't work, and you shouldn't be testing them yourself to figure out if they're edible. People have done the testing.
Are you worried about AI?
Pardon?
Are you worried about AI
For this?
for mushroom identification, that
Oh.
people are gonna?
You know, that's the first time I've been asked that question. And
Sorry, give
no,
me something new to worry about.
No, it's like, I'm just really, now I'm surprised I hadn't been asked that yet, but this is the time where that question is coming up about everything, right? And I'm gonna have to think about that. Not yet, I'm not too worried about it, but because I think a lot of it right now, AI is pretty smart enough to not tell you something stupid about mushroom identification, like that's my gut. But I don't know, it's a good question. I have never queried ChatGPT about a mushroom ID, and I'll be interested to see what happens, you know, when I try that later. I'm
I
teaching.
tried it with Google Lens,
Yeah, and
and they gave me, we cannot answer, this has been a while back, we can't answer to see if it's edible or not edible.
okay. So they're building in some cautions there. Interesting. I'm teaching mycology this fall, and I'll have to play around with that with my students and learn some things. Also, I want to mention, most mushrooms that are considered edible you should cook them to be safe. Some of them have chemicals in them that they're not going to make you, super ill, but they might give you an upset stomach if it's not cooked. So raw edible mushrooms can still give you some gastrointestinal distress. So cooking them is a good idea. That said, there are some exceptions. There are some special mushrooms that can be eaten raw, and I might mention a few of those exceptions, but most of them you should cook. Also, just like any food, like nuts or fruits or anything, some people have allergies. And so don't assume that just because it's an edible species that you won't have an allergy to it. So it's a good idea to eat something, if you're eating it for the first time, eat a small amount, make sure you don't have an allergic reaction. Okay, now we're going to go through some examples. Here's a poisonous mushroom number one, and I put it number one because it's responsible for the most mushroom poisonings of any mushroom in North America. This is the green spored parasol mushroom that I mentioned earlier. It's the only one that makes a green spore print, and it grows in your lawn. And this is what it tends to look like, kind of like portobello mushrooms. So, don't mistake it for store-bought mushrooms. When it's mature, you can see the gills are kind of greenish, so that's a good clue. It's also got free gills that don't attach to the stalk. The ring of space isn't always that big, but it's free gills. It's got a ring on the stalk as well, and it's got a scaly cap with a darker center, like a little brown center to the cap when it's mature.
Is that the one that's like frequently what you're gonna see if you have the fairy ring?
It is. It's one of the classic mushrooms that makes a fairy ring in fields and lawns. Yep. Not always. There are other mushrooms that make fairy rings, but this is one of them. Yeah. So, watch out for that one, but make a spore print of it. It's got a really cool spore print. Nothing wrong with handling it. Just don't eat it. Cortinarius, I want to mention because it's quite poisonous. They have two key characteristics. First of all, they make orange to rusty brown spores. And you can often see the spore color by looking at the cobwebby veil that it has. It has a ring on the stalk, but it's made of cobwebby material, and it ends up like that. And then the spores get caught in that, so it often has a rusty looking web around the stalk. Here's what the cobwebby veil looks like when it's young. Can you see how the gills are covered with those beautiful sort of spider web threads? Then those then end up on the stalk as a ring, and then they catch the rusty spores when they fall out. And then here's one. They're sometimes purple when they're young. They can be beautiful mushrooms, so it's good to know them and appreciate them. Some purple mushrooms are Cortinarius, and you can see the cobwebby veil there about to make a ring on the stalk. So watch out for rusty spores. Here are two mushrooms that will indeed kill you if you eat even just a couple of bites. Amanita phalloides, which is the death cap mushroom. This one doesn't occur in Mississippi that we know of. It's native to Europe and Asia, but it has been introduced to the East Coast and the West Coast of North America. It's pretty common in California. It has spread under oak trees in California. Also, it's been introduced in other parts of the world. And then this one we do have in Mississippi, the destroying angel, this white mushroom here, Amanita amarigorosa. And those will cause ultimately organ failure, like liver failure, for example. You go through this terrible process of, like, first you're vomiting and stuff, and then you feel better, but meanwhile it's still like killing your liver, and then a few days later you start to crash. So definitely bad. Don't eat those. Okay, so there are all these poisonous mushrooms out there. I've talked about the scary part now, so why bother, right? Why bother even trying to identify these things if there's a bunch of poisonous mushrooms? And I would argue that because it's worth it, because wild mushrooms are beautiful, fascinating, and some of them are delicious and really worth putting in your food. It really can enhance your world. And even if you don't eat them, they're beautiful. They're just cool to photograph and to appreciate and find them in nature, and you'll start seeing them everywhere. Once you start looking for mushrooms, you'll start seeing more and more of them, and you can appreciate their identities and their roles in the ecosystem. And they really do have stunning diversity. This is another painting from Melanie. All kinds of different colors and shapes and sizes and habitats, and it's just a fun way to see the world, is to start appreciating the mushrooms around you. And mushroom hunting is fun. This is a photo from a friend in Oxford who has a little dog that she likes to take out mushroom hunting, and I like to take my dogs out when I go mushroom hunting if it's in a safe place for them, and they love it. And it's a fun outdoor activity, just tromping around the woods. So, you know, even if you don't find any mushrooms, it can be just a great way to pass some time. So, with that, I'm going to tell you about some common edible mushrooms. We're going to go through the top examples in our area that are fairly easy to identify and find. And I have to start with number one, which is the chanterelles. I saw the first ones popping up on my property, under my trees in my back property just 2 days ago. And they're coming. With all the rain we've had in the last couple weeks, I think it's going to be a good chanterelle crop in the next week or two. So it's really good timing. Chanterelles, we actually have 7 or 8 different species of them in this area, but there are a couple of main ones. The most common one looks like this. It's got a big, obvious yellow cap and a trumpet shape like this, where it sort of flares and is ruffly around the edges, and it's nearly smooth. It has like maybe a hint of false gills or completely smooth on the underside. This is the smooth chanterelle. And that's the one that I see the most around here. And it's delicious, and it's fun to find and easy to find. You can see them from 30 feet away or more because they're so bright orange, just glowing in the forest. This one is very similar, but it has obvious false gills on the underside. Both of them, when you crack them open, they've got whitish flesh, and they're sort of hollow down the stalk. And there's really nothing else that you can mistake them for. They do have whitish spores if you make a spore print, which you can do. But if you find a mushroom that's trumpet shaped like that and generally orange and firm and it's growing under oak trees and it doesn't have real gills, it's just got either these blunt false gills or it's got no gills at all, it's a chanterelle. And once you start to recognize them, there's just no mistaking them. And I'll give you my phone number if you want to text me photos and say, are these chanterelles? Chanterelles are easy enough that with a good close-up photo, I can tell you, thumbs up, yes. And you'll find them, you'll start finding them. If you go out in the woods during the next few weeks, if you consistently tromp around underneath oak trees in our area during the next few weeks, you'll find them. And once you recognize them, they're like old friends, and you can reliably count on them popping up this time of year. Sometimes longer into the summer and early fall, if we keep getting enough rain and it doesn't get too hot and dry. You can find them throughout the late summer, even in fall. But June is the most reliable time.
Let me ask you a question. So when we're out collecting chanterelles, is there like a kind of an ethical way to collect them? Should you leave some behind? Because it's there. Is there part of the ecosystem there, or should you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'd say, first of all, in terms of the species and whether you're going to hurt the species, collecting them isn't putting any kind of dent in their populations. I think the analogy to think about is that it's like you're plucking fruit off of a tree. The tree is still there. The mycelium is still in the soil attached to the tree. They're going to make mushrooms every year. And also you miss a lot of them. You're not picking all of them, even if you think you are. You're missing a whole bunch. And they're making plenty of spores, and those spores are spreading around. They're fine. So you're not hurting the population. The only evidence I've seen is there are some areas in the Pacific Northwest where there's so many people picking the morels that there's been evidence that there's a bit of a decline in morel populations in those highly picked areas. But we don't have anything close to that in this area. We have thousands and thousands of acres producing millions of chanterelles around here every year. We're just, and only a few of us are picking them. We're just barely plucking a few of them out of this vast number of them. So don't worry about that. In terms of ethics, the other considerations are whose property are you on? Is it public land? Are you along a trail? I like to leave mushrooms along trails so that I don't prevent someone else from seeing that same mushroom as they're walking along the trail in a public area. Make sure you're allowed to pick mushrooms in the place where you are. Different public lands have different rules. Different parks have different rules. National parks, each national park has a different set of rules about mushrooms and foraging for berries and fruit and things like that. You have to read the specific rules for the national park you're going to. State parks are often more restrictive, and you have to apply for a permit. You can get in trouble. I unbeknowingly, picked a mushroom in a state park once and kind of got in trouble in California. I just didn't know what I was doing. I was ignorant, and I've been much more careful since then. So just be careful that you've got permission. The national forests around here, technically you do need permission. You need to apply for a special user permit from the Forest Service. My experience is that they don't care and they don't check and they never ask you anything. But to be safe, if you want to make sure that you will never get in trouble with the Forest Service, then go to the National Forest Service office and get a special user permit for that. But I've never encountered a Forest Service employee ever went out in the forest around here. So take that for what you will.
There are a lot fewer
Natchez
than
Trace
now.
is really strict.
Yes, that's a good point. I don't know if everybody heard that. The Natchez Trace can be very, very strict about mushroom picking and other stuff like that. So
Or
be careful.
leaves or flies, you can't collect insects.
Yeah, okay, so Natchez Trace is a national park system. So look into their rules and you're gonna inquire if there's a permit, but you may not even have a permit. So there are a few other chanterelle species. This one is one that is rare but really cool. It's called the fragrant chanterelle. It's the only one that grows in these true clumps like this. Really, really beautiful species. There are some that look sort of like these two, but they're small and tiny and slender and have some brown in the cap. And some of those books I showed you go into the details of determining those species, but they all kind of look like this. There is one called the red chanterelle. That's a really neat little one. Yeah, they're beautiful. And they sometimes will grow under pines, which is a bit of an exception. Most of these chanterelles will only grow under oaks and hickories and hardwoods, but these guys will also grow under conifers. And they're tiny, and so I often don't pick them because it's just, they don't contribute a lot to the meal in terms of the size and bulk, but this is one that you can eat raw, and I actually like to sprinkle them on a salad or something to add some color. Paige, have you done that before? Yeah, they're kind of
peppery.
a peppery.
And they
flavor.
also look nice.
Yeah.
Like I've done like, sort of marinate like in wine,
Oh, yeah.
herbed wine.
That's a good idea.
And they look really good when they're combined with the other chanterelles.
Yeah, they add nice color.
Yeah.
And so that can be worth it. Yep. And then this one is the black trumpet mushroom, which is in the same family. It's not a chanterelle per se, it's a trumpet, but it is a really good edible. They tend to be more localized, but when you find them, there's a whole bunch. And those can be really good to dry. You can keep jars of dried ones, and you can make good soups and stocks out of them, and they're good fresh as well. They have a distinctive flavor. My wife doesn't like them at all, and won't eat them, and so I have to eat them on my own if I'm gonna, but I find them really yummy. So, you can try them and see. So they have this distinctive sort of trumpet, and then sort of a flared rim on the trumpet, and they're very soft and flexible. I'll show you kind of a look-alike to that one in a minute. But you can find a lot of these around here. You can easily collect 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds of chanterelles in a good foray, in a morning or an afternoon around here at peak season. You'll want to clean them and trim them, and don't hesitate to wash them. These mushrooms, they can handle some water. There's some mushrooms that if you put water on them, they will absorb quite a lot of water, and then it can be harder to cook them, but chanterelles can get sandy, and they've got grit in it. You really want to get that out, and so just go ahead and wash them good. But the best thing you can do is preventative, right? I mentioned this earlier. Trim the dirtiest parts off of them before you put them all together in your basket, and that'll save you a lot of work at the kitchen sink later. All right, which one is the black trumpet, and how can you tell them apart?
The one on the right.
Well, the devil's urn is really tough.
Yeah, that's one thing. So the devil's urn, first of all, they're not really out at the same season usually. Like the devil's urn is early spring when morels are fruiting, but it's also like rubbery and tough. And also, do you notice the shape and how it's kind of a cup that is mostly almost enclosed? They start out closed and then they open like this, but they don't become flared like this, and they're not soft like the black trumpet. Devil's urn is not poisonous, but it's not good to eat either. They tend to be very tough. Yeah. But they are a good spring harbinger of morels, which we'll get to in a minute. Black trumpets, meanwhile, are delicious. And they tend to fruit at the same time as the chanterelles. Okay. Feel free to stop me with questions, but otherwise we're going to charge ahead. This is number 2, chicken of the woods. Chicken of the woods is actually, we have 2 species of them around here, the cincinnatus and the sulphureus. So there's a pink one and a yellow one, basically. The pink one is pinkish on the top, and then if you look underneath, it's got whitish surface. But it grows in these, both of them grow in these overlapping clusters of lobes, usually on wood, either on a standing dead tree or a down dead tree, sometimes at the base of a living tree, but usually on a dead tree. This one has white pores on the underside of the lobes, and this one has yellow pores, like bright sulfur yellow pores. Both of them are delicious and have really nice flavor, and they can kind of be treated like chicken. They cook up well as chicken nuggets, but you want to catch them when they're fairly fresh. if these can grow for a long time, they'll grow for a month or two. And if you catch them at the back end of that, they can get very tough, and you can boil the snot out of them, and they're not going to be edible. And so if you find one, just pick the parts that break off easily, because that means they're soft enough and to eat. So watch out for that one. There is a look-alike I want to mention. This is Berkeley's polypore. It's edible, but it's pale and tough. It's very tough and just not yummy. How can you tell? Can you tell the difference?
It's very light.
Yeah, it's lighter both on top and bottom, rather than with the pinkish or the orange colors. Otherwise, it's somewhat similar. You know, it's got a similar shape. Kind of grows with the lobes on dead wood. Okay. Puffballs, I mentioned earlier. I love eating puffballs, and they can be pretty easy to ID. There's a giant puffball that grows around here. It can get pretty big and grow out in lawns and easy places. My only caveat is just make sure you're not picking them from some place where your neighbor is spraying a bunch of nasty chemicals, because they could absorb pesticides or something out of the grass. So just, if you're gonna eat puffballs, pick them from a spot where you know it's nice and clean and not a bunch of chemicals. So puffballs have a skin on them like this. Can you see that? Sort of a brown skin that is, but it's pretty easy to break through that skin. It's like, it's got a brittle texture, not crispy, but like easy to cut through. Okay, not a tough, thick skin. I'm going to show you kind of a look-alike in a minute. There's a smaller one that sort of looks like a puffball, but when you cut it open, it's got a real thick, tough skin and a dark interior. If you cut open what you think is a puffball, and it's got a nice, soft, white interior like this and a thin skin, it's a puffball. There's just nothing else that you can mistake it for. And these, my favorite recipe is to make fritters. I think they go really well with fried green tomatoes, so if you have a recipe for that, do the same thing with them, and they can kind of intersperse them and have a dipping sauce that maybe works for both of them, or a sauce that you drizzle on them. I really like them like that. They batter up and fry really well, and they're very absorptive. They don't have a huge strong flavor of their own, so they'll take whatever spices you put on them. Paige, feel free to chime in if you've got other recipe ideas. For
No,
any of these.
the chanterelles are the only ones I've ever had the nerve to,
Okay.
to forage.
How do you like to cook chanterelles?
Mostly I like to give them away.
Okay, all right. Me too, I love doing that. I've got a couple friends who have birthdays in June, and that's my traditional birthday present to them. This one friend often has a pizza party at that time where her husband makes fresh oven-baked pizzas and just chucks them out, and we put on different ingredients. I'll bring sauteed chanterelles to that party, put them on the pizza, and bake it up, and they work well for that. Chanterelles, by the way, cook really well in butter. They go well with dairy in general, onions and shallots and eggs. I do, in general, advocate a dry saute approach with mushroom cooking, where you use a very hot pan and don't put any oil or butter or anything in first, and let them especially if they have water in them. Some mushrooms are really dry and don't really handle that well, but if they've got water in them, put them in a hot pan and cook that off until they start sizzling and snapping and starting to brown. Then add some butter or olive oil or both, and spices and things like that. Now, salt can help at the beginning as well to help draw the water out. So if you've got a mushroom that seems like soggy, it's got a lot of water in it, then dry saute is really a good idea, and then salt can help with that as well. And then go from there. Okay, I mentioned puffball lookalikes. So amanitas, which we'll talk about, can kind of look like a puffball. They start out with an egg form like this, with a universal veil around them. But then they eventually, as they grow, they break out of that. But what would you see if you sliced through this? Well, you'd see a little baby mushroom, like an embryonic amanita mushroom in there, rather than just a nice white marshmallow. So that's pretty easy to suss out. And then this is that one with the thick skin that I mentioned. This is the poisonous false puffball, the scleroderma. Scleroderma means tough skin. It's got this hard shell on the outside, and then on the inside it's dark. So you're not likely to mistake that for a puffball once you cut it open, but on the outside you can see how it could be a little deceptive. So you can see it's not that hard if you're just paying attention or watching for these couple of lookalikes. Okay, morels. I know someone submitted a question ahead of time. How do we find morels? Well, not easily around here. That's the first part of the answer. We are at the very southern end of the morel distribution in the United States. You can find a lot more of them by just taking a trip up to Iowa or Michigan at the right time of year and go with a friend who knows, and you'll find just so many more of them, so much more easily. But if you want to find them around here, I'll tell you what you need to do, and that is starting in the month of March, maybe first or second week in March, start tromping around the woods a lot. And do it in bottomland areas, especially along creeks and up on the banks around creeks, around trees like sweet gums and elms and ash trees. Where did I have it here? Sorry. Okay. And eventually, if you keep doing that, you might run into some. And if you find a spot that it can be a reliable spot, or it might not be a reliable spot. It might be a spot that sometimes they're there and sometimes they're not. I know a bunch of spots where I've sometimes found them, and then I go back year after year and I only occasionally find them. And mostly I have unreliable spots. I have one friend who's a turkey hunter, and turkey hunters really know where to find them because it's the same season. Morels only grow so May is morel month in Michigan. Well, in Mississippi, it's like late March and early April. Mid-March through early April. And it could be getting earlier with climate change, so start looking at about the second week of March. But basically it's March and April, late March, early April. Turkey hunters are out there walking around like not finding turkeys, and so sometimes they find morels instead. And those are the folks to talk to about it. If you know a guy who turkey hunts or a woman who turkey hunts, ask them if they know where there are mushrooms out there, and they might have a good spot. So I have one turkey hunter friend, and he has one good spot. He has a bunch of unreliable spots that he shared with me. I've gone to those spots and verified that they're unreliable. And then he's got one good spot that he hasn't told me about. Luckily, I have another friend, Pat, who doesn't like to eat morels, but she goes hunting a lot for mushrooms. She shared me a reliable spot this year that I'm excited to check out next year. Morels are delicious. They're my favorite wild mushroom to eat, and they're really, really good. They are just delicious. So it's worth the effort. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with a walk in the woods, not finding any mushrooms, because it's nice out there that time of year anyway. So go ahead and look for them. But good luck. Oyster mushrooms are a lot easier to find. We have two different species. We have kind of a warm weather one and a cold weather one. Ostreatus is the big one that grows in cooler weather. I often find it in like mid-December or late December when I'm out looking for birds. Just watch for it growing on dead wood almost anywhere that time of year. And it looks like this. It's sort of grayish on the cap with overlapping lobes. The caps are about this big. It's got a little bit of a lateral stalk. It makes a pinkish, like lavender, whitish lavender spore print. And it's beautiful and unmistakable. It's growing on wood, and it's got gills like this, whitish gills, and it's delicious. The one that grows in the summer is smaller, and I don't generally eat it because it's often just tiny and not very many of them, but it's worth watching out for. That one is one that can be cultivated as well, and you'll find these in stores because somebody's growing them in a warehouse somewhere, feeding them sawdust. Okay, any questions about edible mushrooms? Those are my top 5 edible mushrooms for northern Mississippi. First here, yep.
How well do mushrooms typically freeze?
How well do they freeze? I would say just fine. One bit of advice is to cook them a bit first, and that kind of cooks them down, saves you some space, and then they tend to freeze really well. With chanterelles, if I'm finding a lot of them, I will cook up a pan of them and then let it cool, and then put that in a plastic Ziploc and freeze them. And that works quite well. And you can pull them out in the middle of the winter and put them in a stew or whatever you want, or in an omelet or something. But I have friends who just freeze chanterelles, just chuck them in a Ziploc bag and throw them in the freezer, and it seems to work out just fine. Morels, people recommend dusting them with flour first before you freeze them, so that they don't stick together, and they tend to have better qualities when you take them out. But yeah, pretty well. But cook them down first, and it'll save a lot of space. Yes?
Do the oyster mushrooms have a stem, or are they just going straight onto the?
They have a little lateral stem, like, here, let's see. See if we can find an image. So there you can kind of see a little bit of a stem, and then there, a little lateral stem. Depends on the month, like, oh, here, that's probably pretty good image there. A little sideways stem, yeah. And notice the gills are decurrent, they kind of come down the stalk. It's reminiscent of chanterelles that way, but they have real gills, real thin, blade-like gills.
So you said that people can grow those, they
Yeah.
grow commercially, but are they fairly easy to grow at home?
I have not found it to be easy. You can buy a kit, and they'll send you a bag, and you can water that and spritz it and hang it in a closet, and those tend to work pretty well. You can also try to grow them yourself in your yard in a downed log. Like if you cut a fresh log off a tree, wait a couple weeks and drill holes in it, you can plug mushroom spawn into there, and then 6 months later you might get mushrooms out of it. I've tried that quite a bit with oysters and with a couple other species, and I have not ever had much luck around here. There's just too many other fungi that want to compete with them in those logs. But it might be worth a try. I do know we've had different people around here who've had some luck growing like shiitakes in logs around their houses. But if you want to try it, I would buy one of those kits, and that works pretty well. Okay, now we're going to run through just some quick ID points on some other common mushrooms. Okay, this is a key group, an important group to know about. These are the boletes. Boletes are a big group of mushrooms. It's really a family, the Boletaceae. So when I say bolete, it's a very diverse group of mushrooms, but they all have one thing in common, which is that they look like a classic mushroom with a cap and a stalk, but when you look under the cap, they don't have gills, they have holes, little pores. The pores range from, obviously like a millimeter in diameter to barely visible because they're so tiny, but they all have that sort of sponge layer or tube layer under the cap. They're very diverse. There's some that are more in the brownish sort of earth tones sort of side of things, and then some that are more in the reds and blues and bright colors. Some of these are the most beautiful mushrooms we have around here. This one is one of my favorites. It's got this red and yellow ruffly stalk, red pores, with often golden glistening liquid kind of sticking out of it, and a red cap. It's just a gorgeous mushroom. This is the bicolored bolete with a red cap and yellow pores, and they're gorgeous. Some of them are edible, but they're really hard to identify definitively. So it's an advanced topic to try to eat boletes. But if you're just interested in identifying them and enjoying them, they're very beautiful and worthy of attention. This one is pretty easy to ID actually, and it's edible. The old man of the woods, Strobilomyces, is the only one that looks like this, where it's sort of smoky blackish purple with really big scales and tufts on the top, and a scaly stalk, and then this grayish, sort of purplish, bruisey pore surface. And that actually is an interesting edible mushroom that's pretty easy to ID. Tylopolis is in this group here, sort of tend to be purple to brown, big and robust and smell great. They remind one of a porcini, which is a great edible mushroom, but they're too bitter to eat. Unfortunately, all the ones around here just have this nasty bitterness. They're not gonna kill you or be poisonous, but they just taste terrible, so it's a tragedy, actually. Suillus is the slippery jack. They grow with pines, and there are a whole bunch of them, like often in October, under pines, and they're edible and delicious. And so it's worth pursuing how to identify those. I like those quite a lot. Some of them bruise different colors, and you can make fun jokes by, like, you can take a little stick and write messages to people by drawing out the bruising from the tissue. It'll turn blue, so that's fun. Okay, these ones are also very, very common. Not quite as diverse, but pretty diverse and pretty tough to ID sometimes. Russula and the milk mushrooms. It's two different genus names, Russula and Lactarius. Russula and Lactarius are identical in most ways. They have like flesh that sort of snaps like chalk. They don't have any rings or warts or stalk adornments or anything. They don't bruise different colors usually. The one difference between them is that Lactarius, the milk mushrooms, when you break their flesh, they ooze this liquid that we call latex. And it's sometimes white, like this. Sometimes it turns color. And that can be a clue for identification. Some of them are really copious, like you just touch them and they start oozing white milk. Often, though, that milky stuff it has a burning flavor, so it's just not in a good way. Like it's very bitter. There are people, especially in Europe and Russia, they tend to eat these, but they will process them quite a lot to kind of get out that bitterness out. This is a really good edible one, though. This is the indigo milk cap. Beautiful, beautiful blue mushroom that has blue latex. And it's often growing with chanterelles. Not as common, but it's out there, so watch for it. And if you find them, throw them in your basket. They'll stain your chanterelles blue, but that's okay. And it's pretty easy to ID. It's got a kind of a concentric ring pattern on the cap that you can kind of see there, and the flesh and the interior is bright blue. It's a little bit hollow in the middle. So watch for that one. Really cool mushroom. There's a collection that had some of each. And then there is a good Lactarius that grows in the fall under pines called Lactarius paradoxus, and it's got all these different colors, like sort of green to reddish to purple, and that's kind of its characteristic, is how many colors it has. It tends to be very slippery when it gets wet. And then my favorite Lactarius is this one, Lactarius fragilis. This is the candy cap mushroom. This one does grow commonly around here, but it can be tricky to identify it because there's a lot of stuff that kind of looks like it. But once you figure it out, it can be really neat. I find dozens and dozens of them in my yard or right under my deck behind my house. And the really neat thing about this one is that when you dry them, they have this amazing aroma of maple syrup. And they will infuse that flavor into anything you bake them in. So I like to make cookies, like a shortbread cookie, and then it just has this incredible perfume of maple syrup. So they have a very distinctive color. It's this sort of certain shade of brown, orangish brown. And then the gills tend to be that color as well, although sometimes a little paler if it's young. And then when you dry them, there's no mistaking that aroma just fills your house. So a food dehydrator is a good idea, by the way, if you get into mushrooms. Some of them dry really well. Morels can be preserved by drying quite well, and the trumpets, the black trumpets. Chanterelles, not so much. Some people think it's fine. I think they tend to get kind of leathery and lose their flavor. So here's a couple lookalikes. That's the candy cap there. See how the gills are brownish? They tend to stain a little bit. They do have a latex that's sort of clear and hard to see. And then here's a lookalike, although that one is not. It's not poisonous. It's edible, but it's just not good. Okay, and then this is a group you need to know about because some of them are famous, like this one. Does anyone recognize this mushroom, the red one with the white spots? Where do you recognize it from?
Mario.
Yeah, it's from the Mario video games, right? And also folklore and history. There are paintings of this on caves in Italy from ancient people. There's stories about it because it's hallucinogenic. It's got chemicals that'll cause you to have wild, euphoric dreams. Also makes you vomit. Sometimes more the vomiting and less of the dreams, and you never really know. So, but it's been used recreationally by people for a long time. There's a rumor that I like to believe, which is that the story of Santa Claus, with the red and white Santa Claus with flying reindeer, was invented because of this mushroom. And in fact, it's true that deer and reindeer in Siberia will eat these and hallucinate and prance around and act funny. So you can picture a person eating these and hallucinating, and then the reindeer jumping around funny and inventing this story, right? So this is maybe the most famous mushroom in the world, the fly agaric, the Mario mushroom. And we do have these around here, a very closely related species, so you'll see them. Some of them are delicious edibles, like this Kokora mushroom, which grows in California, and a version of it is famous from Italy. This is an edible amanita that we have around here, Amanita jacksonii, which comes out of a white sac and has an orange cap. I saw one in my yard just yesterday. And there's beautiful species like this little golden one that has these golden warts that leaves everywhere. This is a really beautiful one too. This one here is really nice one as well. And then I mentioned this one. This is the edible Amanita jacksonii. It is quite easy to identify, but because it's a close relative of some of the most deadly mushrooms in the world, some people are a little bit wigged out by ever eating any Amanita. Because like, what if there's some weird genetic transfer where the deadly one gives the poison gene to the edible one? And I guess that's possible, but people have been eating edible Amanitas for generations, and they've figured out that they're edible, and this one is super distinctive. And so I do sometimes eat this one, but it's an advanced thing. You're gonna want to make sure you know what the heck you're doing before you would want to eat it, but that's true of any of these mushrooms, right? You want to make sure, but it's very distinctive, I'm just saying. Here's what it looks like on a cutting board with chanterelles. If you ever think you find one of these, shoot me a text. I'm happy to take a look.
Will you find those in like the way the chanterelles, like you'll find more than one, you'll find several in an area?
Often you'll find more than one of these in an area, yeah. Mm-hmm. Sometimes 5, 10, 15 of them in the same spot.
Like that, is that what they,
That looks like it.
my friend sent me this yesterday and
Yep.
I had no idea.
That's it.
is this it right here?
I believe so. Mm-hmm. See, those are older. They've opened up, so that's like on the top right there. Yep.
And they came out of a little egg.
Yep. Yep, that's it.
When you eat it, do you eat the whole thing?
Yeah,
Cap and stem?
yeah.
Both good.
I'd probably separate them and cut them up, but yeah. Mhm. And of course, the caveat here is don't eat anything you're not 100% sure about, right? And ask an expert if you need to verify. I'm not responsible for mushroom poisonings. Okay, quick quiz for you. I'm a professor after all. We need to do an assessment. So here's a quiz. Is this a bolete or a gilled mushroom? Bolete, because it has pores, not gills, right? Is this Cortinarius or Cantharellus? Cantharellus is the genus of chanterelles.
It's a
Which one is this?
It's Cortinarius.
Yeah, it's Cortinarius. What's a cortina? I forgot to mention that. A cortina is the word for a cobwebby veil. Okay, is this Amanita or Russula?
Amanita.
How can you tell it's Amanita?
Because of the juvenile?
Yeah, especially on the
Scaly.
juvenile. That's right. You can see the remnants of the universal veil on the cap there. Some Amanitas leave their remnants on their head, like this one. Others, like this one, where does the remnant from the veil end up? It's at the base, right? This sac down here. That ring on the stalk is a separate thing. That's the partial veil that was covering the gills. A lot of mushrooms have that. what's unique to Amanita is the universal veil that encloses the baby, the whole thing on the outside, and then breaks up into either a sac at the base or warts on the top of the cap, or both, or neither. But usually not neither. Okay, is this puffball or a poison puffball?
Poison.
Yeah, good. Oyster mushroom or Berkeley's polypore? Oyster, good. This is a tricky one. This is a bolete, right? Is it boletus or Tylopolis? Boletus, remember, was the ones on the left of the bolete slide with all the colors, red and yellow. Tylopolis was on the right with all the browns and the earth tones. It's Tylopolis, yeah. Remember, they look delicious and they smell delicious, but they're too bitter to eat. Okay, well, I will stop there, and I'm gonna add my phone number here as well, so you can text me if you have mushroom questions, feel free. I'm happy to try, but make sure to give me a good photo. And, yeah, anyway, happy to take more questions if we have time, but that's all I got for you.
Is it possible you could increase the size of it?
Oh, yeah, sure.
We will.
Yep. Okay. How are we doing, Elena? Do we have time for a couple more questions?
Sure, we're here as long as people want to talk about mushrooms.
Okay.
I have another question.
Uh-huh.
What mushrooms have medicinal properties?
Have what?
Medicinal properties.
Well,
Yeah, so
not a lot of them have been really thoroughly tested with
it's an hour.
medical trials
It's an hour.
repeatedly with human subjects,
So it's 2 hours.
but there are a few. Turkey tail is one where there's pretty good evidence of anti-cancer properties. I think I have a slide with turkey tails actually right here. So that's in the group of mushrooms called polypores or bracket fungi. These tend to grow like this, where they're still sticking out sideways from wood, but when you flip them over, they don't have gills like an oyster, but they have pores like a bolete. And turkey tail is one of those, but we also have a bunch of false turkey tails. Why is it called turkey tail? Well, because the pattern on there kind of looks like the tail of a turkey. But there are other mushrooms that have that too. So if you flip it over, look for the little pinprick holes. It looks like, if it's a true turkey tail, it'll look like this on top, but it has a whole bunch of little holes, visible, tiny but visible holes. The false turkey tails have either like little teeth, or they're completely smooth with no holes. And there's other species of those, but true turkey tails are one of them. That's the one that has the best evidence. I think there's emerging evidence for lion's mane as well, which I think I have a slide for here. Lion's mane is pretty common in cold weather around here, and it's delicious, really, really nice. The more common one is this one, which grows in a big white clump, often up a little ways, like 10, 12 feet up on a dead tree, or even inside a hollow dead tree, and but it's really, really yummy. It tends to cook up and act and smell a lot like crab meat. You can kind of pull it apart, and you can make crab cakes, or you can just make little slices and fry them in butter. Really, really delicious. And so there's an old one there, but you can sometimes have to use a long stick to knock them off if you find one that's up high.
Isn't that what we collected on the Grenada Christmas bird count?
Yeah, yeah.
It was up inside the.
We often find them that time of year in December, around the time when oyster mushrooms are starting to come out as well. So there's some evidence that Hericium or lion's mane has valuable medicinal properties. And that's one that's really common now. If you find products that are marketed as like a mushroom, like mushroom drink, mushroom tea, mushroom beverages, they've all got lion's mane in them. And I don't know honestly how good the evidence is for their properties, but sure are being used a lot. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
And those are found in Mississippi?
Oh, yeah, they're quite common, yeah. You have to be, out in the winter, and looking
They're
up
hollow trees.
a little bit. But yeah, watch for them. And they're not, everywhere, but they're visible enough. They're like a big white ball on a dead tree. And so just look up in cold weather and out in the woods and you'll run into them eventually.
I have found some, even in other times of the year.
Yep.
I saw one last week.
Okay, cool, that's great. This other species also occurs, and more often in warmer weather. It's more delicate and sort of more branched. But yeah, cool. Did you eat it?
Not that one, it was too far gone, but
Okay.
I do like to eat this.
Yeah, yeah.
Does chaga grow in Mississippi?
Chaga mushroom, I don't know, I can't remember what that is exactly.
It's kind of woody.
Well,
If it's a mushroom, I don't know.
we have one called reishi mushroom, and it may be the same thing, I can't remember. But this one does grow quite common in Mississippi. It's actually not lucidum, it's Ganoderma. There's a different species of Ganoderma, but it's quite common and it does grow in Mississippi. It's another one that there is some evidence for medicinal properties.
Those mixes.
Yeah. It tastes terrible in my experience, but you can dry it out and grind it up into a powder and put it in stuff like tea or whatever. And that one does grow pretty commonly. We also have agaricus, which is the same genus as the store-bought button mushrooms and porcinis.
Cremins.
Portobellos. And there are some edible species of these, but there are also poisonous ones, so it's sort of an advanced thing to try to figure them out. Let's see what else I've got. Those are my supplementary slides to help answer questions. Other questions?
What is the only mushroom hunt? I was in Roanoke, Virginia. I was in high school. And this group of crazies went out to the cow pasture to find the psychedelic mushrooms.
Yeah.
Are those aren't the red cap mushrooms, though?
That's a different type of hallucinogen, yeah. Yeah, we have those too. Those are in the genus psilocybe. They have the chemical psilocybin in them. And that is a hallucinogenic chemical as well. And we have multiple species of those around here. Yep. There's one that grows in my lawn. Or, not in my lawn exactly, it grows in the sort of dirt around my house. Although it did seem to grow more right after the house was built, and now it's sort of dying back. I think it tends to grow in areas where there's disturbed soil. But anyway, yeah. So there's some that grow in cow patties, specifically out in cow pastures at certain times of the year, I think more in the summer. And then there's other species that don't depend on cow poop, and they grow just in like bad dirt where there's been disturbed soil.
And then how is that? So that's one thing, but the red ones, I did have an outcropping of all of those things. I was like walking through my own yard and it was like Alice in Wonderland. And I thought, am I supposed to eat these? Is this a message from God?
Yeah. I can't speak for God, but I would say no. But the other thing is, remember, there are multiple species of mushrooms with red caps. I think I mentioned the russula. The most common mushroom in Mississippi is a red-capped russula that looks like this here. And those grow in almost all times of the year and all habitats. And so if you look at it just from the top, it's got a red cap. But flip it over and it's got gills and a white stalk. It doesn't have those white spots on the cap like the hallucinogenic one. Yeah, but the hallucinogenic one, the Amanita muscaria type, that one tends to grow under pines in October. This one grows all year round, but it's up to you.
I didn't.